Hello everyone, we are back and the topic today is alcohol. And when we talk about alcohol, we refer to ethanol or ethyl alcohol, which is the dietary component that is consumed in fermented, such as beer, wine, and cider, and distilled, such as rum, vodka, whiskey, tequila, and cachaça, alcoholic beverages. With regards to the amount of energy that you can get from ethanol, 1 gram gives you or yields 7 kilocalories. I don't know if you remember, but when we spoke about carbohydrate, it was 4, or glucose was 4. Fatty acids or lipids were 9 kilocalories per gram, and ethanol is 7, so it's right in between carbohydrate and fat. With that, in moderate users and alcoholics, if we look at these two groups, ethanol accounts for approximately 10 and up to 50% of the total energy intake, respectively. In other words, if you're a moderate drinker, you just drink a couple, 1 or 2 drinks maximum per day, you may be getting, depending on obviously the kind of alcoholic beverage you are taking in, it can give you approximately 10% of the calories. It can account for approximately 10% of the calories that you ingest in a day. Now, if you're an alcoholic, it goes up quite a bit. It goes up to 50% of the total energy intake of a day for someone who is a heavy drinker. So again, it's just to illustrate or to show that alcohol can actually contribute significantly to your daily energy intake. It doesn't mean that it's an energy that you're getting with foods that contain other nutrients that your body needs. Here you're getting energy from a source that is really poor in any other nutrient. So you're getting an empty calorie, if you will, but can also cause a whole bunch of other effects, as we are going to discuss later. But it contributes for sure to the energy intake that we have on a day-to-day basis. To illustrate this slide has some examples of the energy content of selected alcoholic beverages. So if we look at a light beer, for instance, which contains approximately 5% ethanol or alcohol, if you drink 355 ml, which is usually a beer, it gives you 100 calories. Now, if you go with red and white wines, it's 12 to 14% alcohol, and for much less volume, in this case 148 ml, you get 120 and 130 kilocalories. So because you have a significant higher amount of alcohol compared to beer, you get much more, you get way more calories for much less volume of the beverage. Now if you go with distilled spirits, which is 40% alcohol, 45 ml gives you 100 kilocalories. Mojito, 6% alcohol, in 178 ml, 140 kilocalories. Martini, which is 40% alcohol, in 66 ml, you get 125 calories. Obviously, in this case, it's not just the alcohol. Especially in the mojito, it's not only alcohol. There is some sugar that is added to the beverage that can also contribute to the calorie content. But obviously, the more alcohol you have, the more energy it will be providing, the beverage will be providing. Look at a pina colada, 10% alcohol. It's not even that high, the percentage of alcohol in it, but look at the number of calories, 490 in a glass of pina colada. So again, here it's because there's quite a bit more sugar here that actually adds up and increases the number of calories you get from the beverage. Margarita, 12% alcohol, in 178 ml, you get approximately 250 kilocalories. So as you can see here, depending on how the number of drinks you actually take in, the frequency and the type of beverage you choose can significantly change or add up to the number of calories that one takes on a day-to-day basis. So if you're a moderate drinker, you get a relatively small percentage of your total daily intake calorie intake coming from alcohol. But if you're a heavy drinker, it can be up to half of the total calories that you're taking in on a day. So ethanol is readily absorbed through the entire gastrointestinal tract and is transported in unaltered form in the bloodstream. So it can be easily absorbed because you don't have one specific site in your gut that absorbs ethanol. It can be absorbed anywhere, that any place as it goes through your gut. And again, in the system, in your blood, once it gets into the circulation, it also circulates in a form that is intact. So which means that if all the negative, potentially negative effects of alcohol can easily be caused because of how easy it is for it to be uptaken and also to be transported in the circulation. So the organ that primarily metabolizes ethanol is the liver. Approximately 80% of the ethanol that we ingest reaches the liver, and the remaining 20% go to other tissues, and this includes the brain. So liver is by far the main organ that metabolizes ethanol. And the 20%, or this is relatively small proportion here, is what really goes to your brain, for instance, and can make you drunk. It can really affect the way your brain function, because alcohol has free entrance in the brain. It can easily enter the brain and can affect the function of neurons in a very, very drastic manner. So I think everybody understands when you see an alcoholic or someone who is drunk, that's typically what the alcohol that escaped the liver went to the brain or traveled to the brain, and there it acted and disrupted the normal function of the brain. So the person loses coordination, cannot talk properly, cannot think properly, cannot lose control of different parts of the body. So that's because it's really affecting the way the brain functions. So there are two main enzymes that are responsible for oxidizing and metabolizing and oxidizing ethanol. One is the alcohol dehydrogenase, ADH, and the other one is the Microsomal ethanol oxidizing system, or MEOS. It's also known as the cytochrome P450 system. So these are the two mechanisms, and these are two enzymatic mechanisms that actually allow your body to process, oxidize, and eliminate alcohol once it is ingested. And the way this is processed, it goes the following sequence of events. So the catabolism of ethanol, we have here on the left side here, ethanol, which is a 2-carbon molecule with the hydroxyl group that typically characterizes alcohol. So once you drink it, it's absorbed by the gut, enters the circulation, goes straight into the liver. So liver, you have the alcohol dehydrogenase system, ADH, and the MEOS. So what these two enzymatic systems do is that they convert ethanol into acetaldehyde. As you can see here, the structure of the molecule. Now, a small portion of acetaldehyde can normally exits the cell and can get into the circulation, but most of it, in a moderate drinker, most of it stays in the cell and actually enters the mitochondria. And the mitochondria has another enzyme called ALDH, or acetaldehyde dehydrogenase. So what this mitochondrial enzyme does is to convert acetaldehyde into acetate. So acetate now can exit into the circulation, and because this is a molecule that can be converted into acetyl-CoA, now you can process in the Krebs cycle and produce energy. So remember, skeletal muscle, for instance, is an organ that can take up quite a bit of this acetyl-CoA, or take it as acetate and form acetyl-CoA, and then you can produce energy from that. And that is an important mechanism by which your body can oxidize and eliminate ethanol. Liver, I'm talking about skeletal muscle, but liver also does that. Once acetate is formed in the hepatocyte, the hepatocytes are also very rich in mitochondria. And what they do is they can oxidize a significant amount of this acetyl-CoA that is formed, and then produce or eliminate alcohol even within the hepatocyte itself. But you also have some of that escapes, goes into the circulation, and other organs such as the skeletal muscle, which is a large compartment because it makes up approximately 40% of body weight in men and approximately 30% in women. So you have a large compartment where you can actually process that. But again, liver, which is also very rich in mitochondria, and it oxidizes a significant amount of acetyl-CoA, can also eliminate it right there. So this is basically the steps or the events or the sequence of events that leads to the catabolism of ethanol in our bodies. So MEOS is microsomal and associated with the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. It oxidizes a variety of compounds in addition to ethanol. And this includes fatty acids, aromatic hydrocarbons, steroids, and barbiturate drugs. The importance of this is that MEOS is not only responsible for breaking down ethanol, it can also break down other molecules. So if you take, for instance, a medication, let's say you're treating or you take some kind of Tylenol or some kind of medication that is, you have a fever, or if you have some other kind of disease or condition, you need to use a medication to treat. If you're taking an anti-inflammatory drug, for instance, these are all molecules that can be catabolized in your body, and it is the MEOS that does that. So it's not only for ethanol. So MEOS exerts an important detoxifying effect when the organism is exposed to high amounts of alcohol. And what this means is that if you drink moderately, if you drink 1 or 2 drinks per day, which is what we consider moderate drinker, most of that alcohol can be processed in the liver by the ADH, or the alcohol dehydrogenase system. So very little goes into the MEOS because most of it can be processed through the first enzymatic step that I mentioned. Now, if you drink a lot more, then the MEOS become more important, because now it becomes responsible for oxidizing a larger portion of that alcohol. So in fact, it has been estimated that MEOS accounts for as much as 30% of ethanol oxidation in those individuals who chronically consume high doses of ethanol. So if you're a heavy drinker, you really rely largely not only on the ADH enzymatic system, but you also require a lot of activity in the MEOS system. So it can go up to 30%. So also the synthesis of MEOS is induced by ethanol, which over time increases the tolerance to alcohol and other substances that are oxidized by the MEOS. What's the important implication of this? Again, if you drink moderately, your body can easily, through the ADH system, take care of the alcohol. Now, if you keep drinking more and more, if you drink more, and then what happens is that you need to mobilize, you need to activate additional pathways that can actually facilitate the catabolism of ethanol. And that's when the MEOS becomes enhanced. In other words, you express more of the enzymatic system, the MEOS increases in its capacity, so you can really process more ethanol. And that what it does is that you, with the same amount of alcohol that you're drinking before, you don't get the same high. You don't feel the same thing. Why is it? Because now your body's more capable of dealing with alcohol. So then if you want to get drunk the same way you were getting drunk before, you're going to have to drink a lot more because you are more tolerant to alcohol. And again, it's not only affecting alcohol itself, but if you get more MEOS, you're also more capable of metabolizing other medications or other drugs. So this is a non-specific system or detoxifying system that plays an important or may play an important role with ethanol. But this is because it can be induced by alcohol. The liver can only metabolize approximately 1 ounce of alcohol per hour. And this is regardless of the amount consumed, which means that if you drink in excess, there will be a rise in blood alcohol and it may cause intoxication. So if you go beyond that capacity or that rate of oxidation that your liver displays, you really start affecting many other organs and tissues, because it will spill out, or it will start flooding alcohol, start flooding other organs and tissues. And that's when, again, when the central nervous system is an easy target for that additional alcohol. And also there is a difference between men and women. On average, women have smaller body sizes and they have more fat mass than men. So this translates in a smaller liver to metabolize ethanol and also less body water to dilute alcohol. So women generally display lower tolerance for alcohol than men and are at higher risk of toxic effects in the liver. Obviously, if you both men and women drink equal amounts, the one that has the lower capacity to process alcohol will be the one that will suffer the more severe consequences of the toxic effects of ethanol. In this case, that's why the difference in body size in the case of women can make them more prone to toxicity of ethanol. So what is it that causes toxicity? So the oxidation of ethanol via ADH in MEOS produces significant amounts of acetaldehyde. Remember, when we spoke previously, acetaldehyde is an intermediary molecule between ethanol and acetate. So it's the first step in the process of breaking down ethanol. So some acetaldehyde or acetaldehyde is formed proportional to how much ethanol is being broken down or being processed. So what happens is that some of that acetaldehyde escapes, or is not processed in the mitochondria, and it's not completely destroyed and not completely oxidized. So it can actually act in different organs and tissues and be toxic. So actually acetaldehyde is as toxic as, if not more, than ethanol itself. So it's an important byproduct of alcohol metabolism that can be really damaging to different organs and tissues. It's highly reactive and it exerts metabolic effects by covalently binding to proteins, nucleotides, and phospholipids, and forms what we call adducts. An adduct is actually, by definition, two molecules bound together. So in this case, it's acetaldehyde that was not processed, was not metabolized, was not destroyed. This acetaldehyde now starts binding to different molecules. Let's say if it's a hemoglobin, it will bind to that. It's an adduct. If it's to an insulin receptor on a membrane of a cell, it will also form an adduct there. Inside of the cell, you have DNA. It can bind DNA. It can also form another adduct. So this can be a very reactive and deleterious byproduct of alcohol metabolism that can really cause severe metabolic adverse effects. So adducts, the formation, impair the function of the molecule to which acetaldehyde is bound to. For instance, as I mentioned, if it's hemoglobin, what's the function of hemoglobin? To carry oxygen. But now there is acetaldehyde bound to it. And because that happens, it impairs the ability of hemoglobin to deliver oxygen to tissues, because it impairs the function of hemoglobin. If it's an insulin receptor, for instance, it binds to it and inhibits or impairs the ability of insulin to bind to its receptor. So then you have an effect on glucose metabolism and many other metabolic pathways that are regulated by insulin. If it's another enzyme in the cell, or if it's DNA, replication of DNA is impaired. So it also affects cell multiplication, cell division, because it really affects different mechanisms involved in normal function of a cell, organ, or tissue. So it disrupts the normal function. Every time you form an adduct, you disrupt the function of that particular cell, tissue, or organ. And also, on top of that, adducts enhance lipid peroxidation and promote free radical damage. So lipid peroxidation meaning that free radicals attack that structure, that adduct that was formed, and then once that happens, it damages, and it can cause cell death and destruction of the structure. So it can be really damaging to the cell because of an attack of free radical formation, or due to an abundance of free radical that can damage the structure that forms that adduct. So this diagram kind of puts together this story, and let's go through it in starting from ethanol up here on the upper left corner. So as you can see, ethanol, once it enters, it's absorbed by the gut, it enters the circulation, and arrives at the hepatocyte. So this cell here is a hepatocyte, or a liver cell. So as you can see here depicted by the arrows, the majority, if you're a moderate drinker, if you drink a small amount, again, most of the ethanol goes into the hepatocyte, so the ADH will really deal with it. So in other words, ADH will convert ethanol into acetaldehyde. That acetaldehyde will go into the mitochondria, and then the acetaldehyde dehydrogenase will convert acetaldehyde into acetate. Acetate now becomes acetyl-CoA. Acetyl-CoA can go into the Krebs cycle, and Krebs cycle can then process that acetyl-CoA, and then alcohol is pretty much destroyed or disappears from that particular cell, because it becomes either CO2, and also you get some energy from that. So this is when you drink moderately. Now, if you drink an amount that surpasses that, or that is more than what we call moderate drinking, you're going to not only have the ADH system, but you're going to also mobilize some of the MEOS. MEOS will come into play and say, look, let's help here to try to metabolize. And this will again increase the capacity of the hepatocyte to process ethanol. But again, this is also to a limited amount. It is not unlimited adaptation or adaptive response you have. You can still have some excess of ethanol that by itself is not metabolized and can lead to inflammation, can cause damage to cells and tissues, and can lead to an inflammatory response. And some of this acetaldehyde will actually form adduct. It can also on its own contribute to an inflammatory response. It can form adducts that affect the insulin receptor and can lead to insulin resistance. It can damage the DNA, and this can cause cancer. So liver cancer is a major problem with alcoholics, because the organ that is normally severely affected in alcoholics is the liver, and one of the conditions is cancer, because it can really damage so much, cause so much damage to DNA that the cells become altered and really lead to severe form, a very aggressive form of cancer. Another thing that happens is that when there is a lot of alcohol being processed, and even when you produce a lot of acetyl-CoA and citrate, it can surpass the capacity of the Krebs cycle. It can even go, you can produce so much citrate that it goes beyond the capacity of the Krebs cycle to actually process it. So what happens is some of that citrate exits the mitochondria. In the cytoplasm, it's again converted back into acetyl-CoA. So acetyl-CoA now is a substrate for another pathway that is activated when you have acetaldehyde in the medium, in the cell. And it is the de novo lipid synthesis. This is what this positive signal here indicates. So it enhances the de novo lipid synthesis pathway, which means that you're going to take acetyl-CoA and you're converting it into fatty acids. And now you have an accumulation of fat inside of the liver cell, and then it's stored as triglycerides. So you have these lipid droplets that start to accumulate inside of a liver, and this is what we call steatosis. And another name for this is fatty liver disease. In other words, the liver becomes fatty. There is quite a bit of fat that accumulates in the liver. And this can also be very damaging to the structure, because fatty liver disease is also another typical condition that we find in alcoholics. So again, disruption, there's so much ethanol going through here that the amount of citrate that is produced is beyond the capacity of the Krebs cycle to actually process. So this excess exits the mitochondria, and then it feeds into this system that uses acetyl-CoA as a substrate to produce fatty acids. And these fatty acids can be stored. It forms these lipid droplets inside of the liver. Also, some of those fatty acids are packed up into VLDL, remember, very low density lipoproteins. And this can actually cause dyslipidemia, because remember, VLDL is what gives rise to LDL. So there is an alteration, and there is an extra source of lipids that is not coming from the diet, that is coming from the diet because you can consider the alcohol being part of your diet. But what it does is that it's not that conventional product of liver because you have a surplus of glucose, for instance. In this case, it's because you have an excess of acetyl-CoA that can be converted into fatty acids, and then it's packed up into VLDL, and it can cause dyslipidemia. And you can also have some of these fatty acids exiting the liver as NIFAs, as non-esterified fatty acids, and this can also be sent to different organs and tissues. And we know that when you have also too much fatty acids, or a high concentration of fatty acids chronically elevated in the circulation, it can also cause damage. It can also lead to what we call lipotoxicities, or a toxicity by excess amount of fat in the circulation. So there, you see here the complexity of how many different consequences, or negative consequences ethanol can cause in our system. And again, now we have here a much thinner arrow going to the brain. So you will have the overflow of ethanol, or the additional amount of ethanol that surpasses the capacity of the liver to take in, will flood other organs and tissues. And we usually focus on the brain because brain is very susceptible to alcohol effects, because it can freely enter the brain and can really disrupt the function of neurons, and then obviously every function that is regulated by your mental capacity will be, or your mental function will be severely affected. Okay, so with this we will stop here today, and thanks for watching. We'll see again next class. Bye for now.